Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Seton Hall for the latest installment of our sports media speaker series. Today's event is co-sponsored by the College of Communication and the Arts and the Stillman School of Business, and features two of the preeminent icons in sports media, Bob Lee and Bob Costas. We are honored that today's event is part of, included in Investiture Week here at Seton Hall, which is to honor our new president, Dr. Nair, who we are privileged to be joined with today. So thank you for coming, Dr. Nair. Today, as you all well know, is also Veterans Day, where we'd like to honor those who are currently serving or have served in the military. So if we have any veterans or current people in the military, if they could please stand and be acknowledged. Before we get into today's program, I would like to thank some of those who helped make today possible. Dean Yates of the College of Communication and the Arts and Dean Strouser of the Stillman School of Business, who have been a tremendous support to what we're building here at Seton Hall, which is a unique interdisciplinary sports media program. Danielle Clements, the Executive Director of Marketing in the College of Communication and the Arts, who handled all of the little details, and believe me, there were many. Couldn't be possible without her. Our friends in Stillman, led by my colleague and friend and confidant, Charlie Grantham, who's the director for the Center of Sport Management at Stillman. Our good friends in athletics, especially Associate Athletic Director Tom Chen, who, among other things, heads up Pirate Sports Network. Today's event is being live streamed on PSN, and there are many students involved to help make this happen. Today's event is called The Changing Face of Sports Media. What does that mean? Where are we going? Media is changing by the minute, and sports are at the forefront of that change. Traditional print is eroding, and digital content, especially direct to consumers, is becoming more and more important. So how do we create that content? How do we create business models to deliver that content, to monetize that content, to engage young readers and viewers? Here at Seton Hall, we're attempting to have that conversation. Where are we going? What can we do to be at the forefront of this change? Because with great change comes great opportunity. We're not exactly sure where we're going, but we're at the precipice of a great opportunity here to figure out what's next. And why can't that be figured out right here in our classrooms, in our innovation labs that we're developing? It all comes down to really three things: communication, collaboration, and innovation. And that's the base of everything we're doing. It starts in the classroom, where we're teaching our future leaders how to communicate, how to collaborate, how to talk to one another, how to do things together, and then finally, how to innovate. It really starts, with communication. You can't have innovation without collaboration. You can't have collaboration without communication. Those are the building blocks that we're building here. We're basing it in the classroom, right? With critical thinking, with history, with basic skills of how to communicate, how to create content on multiple platforms, how to build relationships, how to work together as one, right? It's not just us that are talking to our students. It's our students who are talking to us. And are we listening? Can we work together to create platforms of tomorrow? Facebook 15 years ago was an idea. Twitter was an idea that happened in innovation labs, right? So we're delivering that directly to our students. Students today are involved in every single part of this event. As I mentioned, this is being live streamed right now on Pirate Sports Network. Students are behind the camera. We have a mobile production van outside. They're directing, they're editing in real time. They're putting this out, on social media. Two students in my classes will join us later in the program. There was a contest. to write an essay on the significance of Mr. Costas' career. And if they got a chance to ask them some questions, what would it be? And 2 of them will join us. That will be followed by 2 student athletes, here at Seton Hall, who are going to join the conversation. There's going to be a video that you're going to see in a few minutes that was done by one of our students, Keith Egan, a senior visual and sound media major. That video was executive produced by Bob Lee. So one of our students got to work directly with Bob Lee on this video that you're going to see. I'll let Mr. Lee tell you about that in a second. But first, I want to introduce one of our own, Seton Hall's Bob Lee. Mr. Lee embodies everything. Before he comes up here and is as humble as can be, as that's Bob, I want to really put into perspective what he's all about. Bob embodies everything that Seton Hall represents: integrity, hard work, and respect. He is helping us build our program here by connecting directly with students. Over the last year, I've had an opportunity to work closely with Bob, and I'm proud to call him a colleague, a confidant, and most importantly, a friend. From the second you meet a person, that this is somebody you want to be involved with for a long time, a person you just click with. And that's how I felt with Bob. We sat together for 5 minutes, and I knew right away, that, everything they've ever said about him, is absolutely true. There's no better journalist. He was ESPN's moral compass for the better part of 4 decades, best known as the host of Outside the Lines, which was journalism at its finest. He's won 11 Emmys, a Peabody and DuPont Award, among others. Most recently, he was inducted into the National Sports Media Hall of Fame. He's about to be inducted into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame. But as good of a journalist and as talented as a broadcaster as Bob Lee is, he's an even better person. So ladies and gentlemen, please extend a warm welcome to Seton Hall's own Bob Lee.
Thank you, BJ. With those kind words, you expect there to be a coffin here. Not yet. It's always fun to be back here at Seton Hall. The last time I was in this room on campus with a similar event that BJ and Charlie Grantham had put together was back in April. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, spoke at that time. You might remember Stephen A. Smith was here. Anybody here from that event? And Stephen went on at some length about the joys and the beauties of American capitalism, and that bite went viral. It has particular application as they reports now that Stephen has a new, not ungenerous contract with ESPN. I am thrilled to be here today to introduce a gentleman whose work I have just admired and respected to the nth degree for decades, who is literally the gold standard in our industry. And BJ had mentioned the video you're about to see, which will explain to you those that, if you're by some small chance not fully aware of what Bob Costas has achieved and represents in this industry, and what Keith Egan has done, a senior, about to graduate here at the Hall, with very little help from BJ and myself, just nudge here, nudge there, word tweak there, is example of what our students are doing here on a daily basis. So without any further ado, to the screens to learn about Bob Costas.
Everybody, I'm Bob Costas. This is the Larry O'Brien Trophy, named for the late commissioner, emblematic of the championship of the NBA.
With over 40 years of sports broadcasting experience, Bob Costas is the gold standard.
Super Bowl 46 will kick off at Lucas Oil Stadium. Greetings from the edge of the cupola just inside the home stretch here at Churchill Downs. Hello and Happy New Year, everybody. I'm Bob Costas.
Shortly after graduating from the Syracuse University School of Communications in 1972, Costas got his first job on air at the age of 22, calling games for the St. Louis Spirits of the American Basketball Association. 2 years later, Costas made another jump to CBS Sports, where he called football and basketball. In 1980, Costas was hired by NBC, who would become the face of their sports coverage for decades.
Open. Chicago with the lead. A pop in a shallow left. The New York Yankees, world champions, team of the decade. The entire NFL Live crew will be here to help us set the stage for the battle between the Bengals and the 49ers.
For NBC, Bob Costas has been a part of 12 Olympic Games and the primetime host for 11, a figure unmatched in American broadcasting.
Look who gets it next. What's the most dynamic figure in sports? A gregarious man, still exuding nobility and stature. This remains an authoritarian state with an abysmal human rights record. In the long run, is China's rise irreconcilable with America's interests?
And no, in the long run, America better remain engaged with China and understand that we can have a cooperative and constructive yet candid relationship.
Bob Costas has always maintained an honest position and has never let that change over the course of his career. Whether as a host, play-by-play, or journalist, he has always used his position to speak unapologetically on problems that matter.
There is a gun culture in the National Football League. The game is unacceptably brutal. Washington playing Dallas here tonight. It seems like an appropriate time to acknowledge the ongoing controversy about the name Redskins.
Costas has been recognized for his success and consistent model behavior in sports broadcasting, winning 21 Emmys, 8 National Sportscaster of the Year awards, and most recently being inducted into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame.
My primary thoughts tonight are thoughts of gratitude and appreciation for those I've worked for and with, and all the friendships, many of them spanning 4 decades.
Now with the MLB Network covering the sport he loves most, Costas continues to embody intelligent broadcasting, using vivid language and descriptive imagery to convey sports' most impactful moments.
For all of us, boa noite from Brazil.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a Seton Hall welcome for Bob Costas.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
You get a standing ovation before you even have a chance to mess up. It's
I
pretty
told
good.
you, it's a very hospitable place. It's the scenic gaslit village of South Orange. Let's start with the obvious. You and I have each taken a turn this year in our lives and our careers after about 4 decades where we had been. What strikes you about the sports media landscape and changes in your own life? I've been asked about that several times here today. What's been different?
Well, all I did professionally, for the most part, there were a few little things here and there, but for the most part in 2019, all I did was call baseball games for the Major League Baseball Network, which is the only thing I have much interest in doing play-by-play of anymore, so I enjoyed that very much. I will probably, starting next year, go back to doing some of the long-form interviewing and commentary and journalistic stuff in other places that I used to do, but in 2019 I just wanted to have a year that didn't have all that much, didn't place all that many demands on me. My disappointment, and maybe some people here are interested in this, I wouldn't assume that the general public is all that consumed by my comings and goings, but the situation at NBC was, not to my surprise, widely misreported, because this, what I'm about to say, ties into the overall theme here, which is the state of the sports landscape, which has to do with the state of the media landscape. This is not unique to me or you. Almost anything which is of any public interest now goes into a distortion machine. So no matter how accurately and carefully it is reported or expressed to begin with, then it becomes like a high-tech game of the old kindergarten game of telephone, where it begins with the cat climbed up the tree, and by the time the last kid has the message, it was the boy killed the cat. So I I left NBC because we mutually agreed that they no longer were inclined to do the things I was at this point in my life and career interested in doing, and I was no longer inclined to do the Olympics, not because I didn't enjoy it, but I did a dozen of them. I certainly wasn't inclined to continue hosting the Sunday Night Football broadcast. My feeling about that is if you're Al Michaels, who's phenomenally great, you have complete integrity in just calling the game. If you're Chris Collinsworth, who's also great, you have complete integrity in analyzing the game. But my role was different. My role was to bring it on the air, to present it, and theoretically to do some commentary here and there. But if I was going to be hamstrung doing that commentary, when I couldn't, forget about lifting up rocks and looking to see what was underneath them, when I couldn't just acknowledge elephants in the room, then it just felt to me increasingly uncomfortable. So I didn't want to do it any longer, but I also recognize that it's their shop and they have every right to put on any presentation they want. It was somewhat disappointing to me when I signed my last contract. It included the NBC Sports Network. The cable network was in its nascent stages then, and their idea was that I would have a program that would replicate the kind of program I used to do on HBO. And we did it for about a year and a half. The programs were very good and they were very well received. I can't prove it, but I think that some of them journalistically cut a little bit too close to the bone when it came to some of their partners, specifically the NFL. And without ceremony or further explanation, they just stopped doing the shows. Now, if those shows had still existed, even though the audience for them comparatively is infinitesimal alongside hosting the Olympics or Sunday Night Football or the Super Bowl, I would have been perfectly content to stay. But there was just no place for me to do the sort of thing that at this point in my life would be gratifying for me. But the way the media latched onto it, and it's understandable.
Because the media is going for the easy,
Yeah.
digestible, 140-character explanation.
That's right.
Costas left. Why?
Yeah, they want a flashpoint. And so it was that I wasn't on the 2018 Super Bowl. And they had already hired Mike Tirico, which was a great hire, by the way, as we both know. Recipient, by the way, of the first Bob Costas scholarship at Syracuse University in 1987.
I think he's put it to pretty good use.
He has.
Yes.
He has. He was, you know, he remembers it this way, and I'm sure he's right, that I flew up to Syracuse to check on the first recipient to make sure he wasn't a knucklehead. And certainly he was not a knucklehead, and he's one of the most versatile and talented people in the business. So they did the right thing in hiring him to succeed me in a host role and probably someday Al Michaels as the voice of Sunday Night Football. But the 2018 Winter Olympics, which was his first in Korea, was to start only 4 days after the Super Bowl. And he couldn't be expected to do all the preparation for that and then fly 14 hours across the ocean and deal with the jet lag. He had to be there. So somebody had to host the 2018 Super Bowl. A year before that was to take place, they thought it would be a good idea for me to host it. And I said, fine, if that's what you want me to do, I'll come out of mothballs and host that one Super Bowl. But then I wasn't running around town with a megaphone or riding it on a white horse, but when asked on cable programs or in a seminar, a journalism seminar much like this at the University of Maryland, when asked about the future of football, part of my response was that they have an existential problem with CTE and the very nature of the game. And in this atmosphere, those comments weren't confined to the people in the room, which was who I intended them for. They went viral. It made NBC uncomfortable, and they decided that I shouldn't host the 2018 Super Bowl, which didn't matter to me even a thimble's worth. I was just doing it because they asked me to do it. I'd been there, done that, didn't care. So I said, look, why don't you have me interview Roger Goodell on the Super Bowl? I'd rather do a real interview, a newsworthy interview, and heaven knows there were lots of issues and continue to be circulating around the NFL.
Did you really think, though, there was a chance that, A, they would advance the request, and B, Goodell would say yes?
I didn't think there was much of a chance on the second. On the first, I'm pretty sure what happened. They've always been honest. We've disagreed, but they've always been honest. At times we've disagreed. And I think they asked. And I think it went something like this. Hey, Roger, if you want to do an interview on the Super Bowl with Costas, that'd be good. Nah, I don't want to do it. Okay, what's for lunch? There was no pushback, and there was no what I would do or like to think I would do in that position, which is, hey, we pay you billions of dollars, your league billions of dollars. Every third year we have the Super Bowl. You ducked us in 2015 at the Super Bowl, and every regular season since, Bob has politely asked, when do you want to do it? There's 18, 19 weeks in the season. And come December one year, the answer was, our fans are concentrating on the playoff picture. Like, there isn't enough coverage of the NFL, day in, day out, 365, that you couldn't spare 15 minutes at some point without the fans rebelling or being too distracted from the wild card race. So I pretty much knew that, they can get away with whatever they want. They can be as high-handed as they want. But my point is that I would rather have done a legitimate interview with Roger Goodell than hosting the whole 6-hour extravaganza, which they presented to me as, you're no longer the right guy because it's a day-long celebration of football. To which not only did I not push back, I said, yeah, you're damn right. I have someone else pass out the noisemakers on the party hat. That's not my role any longer. But I did not leave NBC after that. I hosted all 3 Triple Crown horse races that year. I did several essays for them. And it was only as we had our discussions and we realized, you know what? This is no longer a fit. I'm a square peg in a round hole, no hard feelings. Let's just settle this and I'll go my way, you go yours, with a lot of great memories. But I didn't quit on them and they didn't fire me. It just kind of petered out.
Yeah. Which gets to the entire question, though, of the business relationships between leagues and broadcast entities, whether journalism can exist and flourish in such a situation. And that certainly varies, I think, from league to league. You take a look at what you describe and what I've reported on with the National Football League, the concussion issue. I can remember doing a program in the year 2000. Troy Aikman was sitting out with his 8th concussion.
Yeah.
So our history on Outside the Lines goes back about 19, 20 years. And clearly there were moments when the NFL, I think, would prefer that the reporting was not as thorough as it was.
At that time, they were still denying it.
Oh, they were having the deniers of science having the pressure to take things out of a scientific publication. They had Elliot Pellman, who was a endocrinologist, as the head of the
he was the head of
concussion
their
committee.
Yeah.
My point is, different leagues react differently. See, we all, I think, if we follow the media, understand how the National Football League, under Pete Rozelle, was birthed as this great PR machine and has sold itself so well and is now basically, to take that line from the movie Concussion, owns a day of the week. Then you look at something like the NBA in China, which just dropped a month ago, Daryl Morey's tweet, and how Adam Silver and the NBA, after a rocky start, I think that first couple of statements, and then within 24 hours, I think they got their public relations and principled footing. Very different league, very different players, very different scenario.
Yeah, the NBA under David Stern and now under Adam Silver, the whole ethos of the league is more progressive than any of the other major sports leagues in North America. But I would say this, I would say that they still haven't satisfied me in their response, and so far as I know, and it's impossible, there's so many outlets now, no one can follow all of it, but I haven't seen anyone hold them to account. Their story, at first they fumbled it, but then the story became, we stand by all of our people, be they players or whatever the relationship is in the league, their right to free expression, their right to free speech. That's a core value of the NBA, and that's as far as it went, and they weren't pushed any further. But that comes fairly close to the famous Voltaire statement, I do not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But wait a minute. Now you can debate whether it does anybody any good to put your every random thought out on Twitter. Daryl Morey wasn't going to change the direction.
By the way, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. It's often just a high-tech version of a bathroom wall, but we'll get to that later. Sure. At a gas station, not your home bathroom. So Daryl Morey was not going to in any way positively influence what's going on in mainland China or in Hong Kong with his tweet. But nonetheless, if free speech is a core value of American democracy and therefore of the NBA, so too is human rights, basic human rights. So not only in this case, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, not only did Daryl Morey have the right, but how was he not right? And Adam Silver, and no one I know in the NBA, has said that forthrightly. What I would prefer to have them say is, look, it's a complicated world. We have economic involvements with nations and entities across a spectrum. I mean, Russia provides all kinds of players for the NHL. There's no problem with that. We don't have to think that Vladimir Putin is a good guy to have no problem with Alex Ovechkin. We understand that. All right, so China's a huge market for the NBA. We're in that market, but we will affirmatively state that we do not approve of policies that suppress human rights. And in fact, China is one of the world's greatest, and when you consider their size, perhaps the greatest violator of human rights on the planet. You know, I would have preferred that they say that, but they haven't.
So as that goes down,
Yeah.
immediately, who's the most prominent voice at the NBA? Well, yes, financially and realistically on the spreadsheet, it's Adam Silver, but in the culture, it's LeBron James.
Yeah.
And so the clock starts ticking. What is LeBron going to say? I would suggest LeBron could have used a little bit better support and staff work around him when he did make his statement, but he also did put it back on the commissioner, saying, where are the players in this? And then it opens the players up to their scrutiny of, players are so forthright on existential issues in American society. All right, well, we know you've got this Chinese market waiting to be fully exploited in an economic sense, and Nike dollars at the ready. Why aren't you speaking now? And so it opens the door to the charge of hypocrisy. And you look across the sports media waiting for a thoughtful exposition on all of this, and you don't see a lot of it.
And they leave themselves open, usually to kind of the Fox News crowd, those types. They leave themselves open to a charge of hypocrisy. You swallow your tongue on China, but you take the NBA All-Star game out of North Carolina because they don't have transgender bathrooms. Now, I'm not saying the transgender issues are not legitimate issues, but on the scale of human rights violations, political correctness aside, these things are not remotely equal. So if you're upfront on one, you could at least make a forthright statement on the other. And LeBron, who I give tremendous credit to for the work he's actually done, he's put his money where his mouth is.
That school is incredible.
Incredible, right? And I think he's right about a lot of things. And I think he would also be right to say, look, I have a greater feeling for, and I believe I'm better informed about domestic American issues. That's fine, but that's not exactly what he said. And the fact of the matter is that what is it? Spaceballs 2.
I can't wait.
Well, but apparently in China they're big on it, and it's opening in China. And as splendid as his NBA salary is, he makes more money from Nike now and in the long run. And Nike's heavily invested in China. So it just doesn't. It looks very selective, like selective moral outrage on his part. And I'll add this. This is interesting. I have some experience with this. In 1996, at the opening ceremony of the Atlanta Olympics, China comes in, only recently readmitted to the Olympic movement. And I said something to the effect of, here is China, recently re-entering the family of nations and the Olympic movement, more than 1 billion people, economy growing at more than 10% a year. Every nation, including the United States, wants in on that economic growth, but of course there are issues with human rights, threat to Taiwan, copyright infringement, and when it comes to the Olympics, if there is any nation that has the means and the motivation to replicate the old Soviet and Eastern Bloc sports machine, for better and for worse, you're looking at that nation. The internet was in its infancy, but from Beijing, there was a concerted effort here in the United States, not just to protest, and there were protests outside 30 Rock and in Chinese language newspapers, but the government demanded a sincere public apology from me in prime time on NBC, and or that I be fired. So this is the same.
What'd the company do?
The company did nothing except a PR person issued one of those "we are sincerely sorry if anyone was offended" statements. It contained no quote from me, and eventually the issue went away. But this has always been their playbook. I mean, look what they said with regard to Maury and the Rockets. We do not recognize a right to free speech when it comes to sovereign nations. Really? Well, screw you. We're the United States of America.
You know, I started with you talking about with our lifestyle changes and things that we're doing differently. And now as a consumer, I know the one thing that really hits me squarely, that I'm not just plugged into my phone and my former company's content, is just the fire hose of content, both for sports and news, that is out there every day. And I believe that one of the most important decisions you make is what alerts you set on your phone. I think you could sit around and consume thoughtful, intelligent media all day, and you look up and it's dinner time, and your bagel is still sitting there from breakfast. So what do you do? And so we try, you know, everyone in this room, I think, manifestly is I think, smart because they came to see you. And I'm
Well, they're bored.
Yeah, no. But I wonder what the appetite is out there for a thoughtful audience, and whether the industry feels that there. And I question at times whether enough entities feel that there's enough prospect of really doing thoughtful work.
Well, the cable outlets really are the place for a lot of that. And we know that ESPN all day long has programs debating such questions which they make up, you know, like
I'm shocked.
Like in May, in May, the sound isn't even on. You're in the gym or something, and you see here's the question: who's under more pressure, Jason Garrett or Dak Prescott? Debate. You know, and they will for the next 15 minutes. All right. We know that the airwaves are filled with that, but still, there's E60. Only once a week now, but still there's outside the lines where you distinguished yourself. There's a place for it. There's 60 Minutes of Sports is on the CBS Sports Network. You got to look for it. Okay, you're not going to be alerted to it necessarily. You got to know where it is and seek it out, but it's there, and it's 60 minutes. It's 60 minutes quality. HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel's been going strong for a quarter century. That's the gold standard. And they did that sort of thing with me in the past and may again. But on the networks, their feeling is people tune in to see the games, to see the action. And generally speaking, with notable exceptions, the only thing that the networks, talking about ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, the only thing they will do is acknowledge issues, but they will not delve into them or run the risk, generally speaking, of alienating one portion or another of their audience.
Because the sums of money at stake, they have almost as many digits as Elizabeth Warren's health plan. I mean, it's out there.
Bob has good material.
No. You know, what's $1 trillion among friends? You know, I mean, really, when you get down to it.
In her case, not much.
Exactly.
Bookkeeping.
Pony up. But the fact of the matter is the lifeblood of the financial sheet of the sports divisions of and of course at ESPN.
Yes.
Their contract is coming up. And I don't know for a fact, but I assume there's plan A. We pay the price, and that price is put on the table, and it's the price you'll pay. Negotiation not necessarily being an operative word, or there's plan B. It's not coming back, and we lose all of these abilities to have the ancillary shows and the games themselves. I mean, you're talking about a network that, for example, in the case of ESPN, is paying $1.9 billion a year to televise 17 football games. And with that goes great licensing.
Only like one playoff game
one
and no
playoff
Super
game,
Bowls.
exactly. But it is the importance of those contracts, the importance of the Super Bowl alone in attracting a mass audience, which is just, it does not happen anymore in American television. The Super Bowl is the only place where you can gather people like that.
To prove that point, as if it needs further proof, NBC's next Super Bowl was to have come up in February of 2021. They asked for and got a one-year bump so that they'd have the Super Bowl in 2022 to be able to use it to promote the upcoming Winter Olympics a few weeks later. in 2022. That's the importance of the Super Bowl. And it isn't just that the NFL reigns supreme in sports, which it obviously does. It is far and away the single most important thing in all of American television. If you look at the end of the year at the 20 top shows in television, maybe the Academy Awards breaks through, maybe if the World Series goes to a 7th game, it breaks through, but they're all NFL games. And so the NFL gets to almost dictate the terms. And as I said last year on an E60 program on ESPN, sports TV in general, and especially the relationship between the networks and the NFL, is the only business arrangement I can think of where the buyer has to continually flatter the seller. Here's the $1 billion, but if we've offended you by delivering it in the wrong denominations, we'll be right back with another Brinks armored truck. That's kind of the way it works. Then the commissioner of the NFL gets to say, yeah, I'm not doing an interview on the Super Bowl. Nope, not going to do it. Not going to answer the questions.
And the voices that might arise to point all that out, all right, one here, and I'm sure many in this room, but what platforms do they have? And I would suggest, and we've ticked off all the very good programs that exist out there, but against that fire hose of National Football League programming and the imagery and owning the day of the week, that line from Concussion, overwhelms anything else. Give me my games. Just give me my games.
And people want give me my games. But of course, there's a distortion with the internet and Twitter and everything else. Those who are somehow unhappy seem to have a disproportionate voice. And think of it this way. Let's say that Walter Cronkite had an approval rating of 90%. Let's say Johnny Carson at his peak had an approval rating of 90%. The raw number that didn't like Johnny Carson or Walter Cronkite for whatever good or bad reasons is a substantial raw number, although it's a small percentage. If they were on Twitter saying Johnny Carson sucks and Walter Cronkite's an idiot, and there were thousands of such comments, it would leave a false impression. Plus, there's something else about sports, which should be obvious but is seldom said. Let's say we're talking about late night television. You like Stephen Colbert? Fine, you watch Stephen Colbert. You prefer Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel? That's what you watch. But if you want to watch this game, then you have to come through Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, or Jim Nance and Tony Romo, or Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth, whether they are your cup of tea or not. That's the only thing in entertainment where if you want the specific thing, you have to embrace or put up with what comes with it.
I think we'd be shocked how often the volume is down when we're on TV.
People say that, People say, oh, I mute the TV whenever so-and-so comes on. I think in most cases they're not telling the truth. Or it's like, ever since Bob Costas said what he said about guns, which isn't what they think I said because their attention span is that of a gnat, but whatever, okay? Ever since then, I've never listened to anything he says, and yet they seem to know everything I've said.
You've basically just hit on the germ, the DNA of sports talk radio.
Yes.
The angry dial.
Yep.
First time caller, long time listener.
Right. The anger,
if
that's
you're
what
not
moves the needle. Anger.
Yeah. Stick to sports.
Yeah.
Stick to sports. That has been, if anything blew that out of the water, it was certainly NBA and China. But I think the incumbency on those of us in the media that work on stories to be educated before we open our mouth, I think is substantial.
Of course.
And I think the idea that something like NBA China comes out and you got people just grabbing at the headline and going with that on the air and saying, well, maybe it's the right thing to say, but not based in fact, it's dangerous. And it gives rise to saying, you can't let these guys talk about this. Look at this. It's So I think, and I was speaking to a group at the radio station before we came over here to do this and talked about that. You've got to know what you're talking about.
Yes.
From the smallest detail to the largest concept. And I wonder, and again, picking what you want from that fire hose of content as you assess as a consumer, who am I going to listen to him? Am I going to listen to her? Am I going to read that?
Yeah.
You're going to draw your opinions in short order on people.
Yes, but those of us who actually do this for a living have an even greater responsibility to be well informed. But even when you do a good job, there are going to be distortions.
Oh,
And it's going to be based on people's gut reaction. So, stick to sports says, and generally that comes from, not always, but it comes from a right of center crowd because they don't want these social issues to be addressed. Or, as Laura Ingraham famously said, first it was shut up and sing, and then it became shut up and dribble, because these people are not qualified. And yet, notice, okay, when you are saying what they want to hear, the floor is yours. The floor is yours. Kurt Schilling is on Fox. Bobby Knight has been on Fox. I happen to like Bob Knight. I mean, not everybody does, and I've gotten along with Bob Knight through the years, and there's a lot about him to respect mixed in with it's a complicated situation. But Bob Knight is a Trump supporter and a right-wing guy, and he had the microphone anytime he wanted. Shut up and sing if you're Barbra Streisand. But John Voight, fine actor in his day, who has been on Fox's air proclaiming that Donald Trump is a deeply honorable man and the best president since Abraham Lincoln. And who knows better than John Voight, who's a presidential scholar? If you can't get Doris Kearns Goodwin or Michael Beschloss, you might as well get John Voight. But the point is that the floor is his. So this is so hypocritical. This really means stick to sports unless you're saying what I want to hear. Then the other thing is, like in my case, here's what you sometimes hear. Again, I think it's a small percentage, but it's just amplified. I used to like him until he began to politicize everything. Well, I started doing these halftime commentaries, which they asked me to do. I didn't demand to do them. And usually
they asked you?
Yes. Yeah, they asked me.
What was the first one?
I don't remember what the first one was, but in 2009, I was growing really bored with hosting in the studio.
And we should say that people are going to hear like the Super Bowl and just another Super Bowl. And I've worked World Cups. This is true. There is an ennui professionally that will set in. So I mean, I recognize the sincere emotion here.
Yeah, I mean, I had ambivalent feelings about hosting Super Bowl, hosting the NFL anyway, which I'd actually left in the mid-'90s because it just wasn't moving the needle that much for me. And I came back because NBC really wanted me to do it, and I understood their reasons for wanting me to do it. And then noticing that my enthusiasm was waning all the more, they said, what if we take you out of the studio and have you go on the road in 2009? You'll be at the stadium, you can do interviews with players and coaches, and you'll be with Al and Chris and blah, blah. So I agreed to do that. But then they figured that once the pregame was over, they wanted me to have some presence. And the way it started was they wanted me to interview a player or coach from earlier in the day who had done something significant, and they found out that they had satellite problems and there was a delay and the interviews were awkward and there wasn't enough time. So they said, well, why don't you do an essay on some subject or other? Okay, from 2009 through 2016, that's what, 8 NFL seasons, right? If my math is correct. Right. There's roughly 20 games. There's roughly 20 games on the air. So again, if my math is correct, that would be 160. 160. Some of them were just promos for an upcoming, but let's say even 120 of them were essays of one kind or another. Two had some kind of political tinge to them. One was a commentary about the gun culture in the NFL.
Which is an objective, or was an objective fact.
Absolutely. There was a shot of there was an article in the USA Today, a cover story in the USA Today. Sports Illustrated had done it, and so too had ESPN done it. Before I did it at halftime, the day after Jovan Belcher murdered his fiancée and then committed suicide. Okay, that was one. And the other was the Redskins team name, which again came up a few days after. It had been an issue that had been somewhere on the radar screen, but it bubbled to the surface again because of some protests.
Every
and a lawsuit.
Democratic senator signed a letter, which kind of puts it in the news.
And Obama said that they should seriously consider changing the name. And Goodell said he would look into it, but obviously they haven't done anything. And Dan Snyder said, we'll never change the name, put it in caps. And as it happened, Washington was playing Dallas that Sunday night on NBC. So if that isn't an intersection of sports and an issue that does have a political aspect to it, I don't know what is. And so I did that commentary, which was much more measured than people who fly off the handle. They thought it was, well, I'm bowing to political correctness, and I went out of my way to stipulate that I thought in most cases political correctness was dubious at best and ridiculous at worst, but in this one case, get a dictionary. I consulted 5. Every dictionary defines Redskins as pejorative, offensive,
A slur. Yeah.
every one. Take other nicknames associated with Native Americans, chiefs, braves, warriors, or even tribal names, which usually are appropriated after consultation with the Seminoles, the Chippewas, local tribes, whatever. They are not by definition insults. Some may object to symbols or rituals, but by definition, they are not insults. By definition, Redskins is an insult. I also went out of my way to say, look, I'm sure that 99% of people who root for the Redskins or use the name intend no offense. They took offense because they inferred that I was saying that they were bad people or bigots. I wasn't saying that. I was saying take a step back. In 2013, would you name a team the Redskins? And if you did, tell me what the equivalent would be if applied to African Americans, Asians, Hispanics. Just tell me. I wasn't saying that this is the most important issue facing Native Americans. They themselves would tell you it's well down the list. But tell me, what sense does it make to use this name? Now, whether you agree with me or not, it was certainly not a shoot from the hip commentary. And more to my point, 2 out of 120. And yet I guarantee you there are people out there who sincerely believe that I was constantly injecting politics when I'm trying to watch the game. But here's another point that should be readily grasped by someone with the intellect of a 12-year-old. I'm on the pregame and the halftime. I'm not costing your attention for one play. And when I do play-by-play of baseball on the Major League Baseball Network, there are no mentions of political issues. I might mention, because it's relevant, if a pitcher's from Venezuela, that he's concerned about getting his family out of a nation that's in turmoil. But that's a parenthetical aside that has bearing on what's going on. It's not taking a political position. And yet, it's just an example of how, in this world, people hear what they want to hear, and it's constantly reinforced because they never have to go to someplace where they'll hear evidence to the contrary.
Every night they retreat to the cable network that reinforces on the left, right, or if you can find anything in the center, their particular point of view. You know, talking about that nickname, we did an hour special on it. I did a commentary. I kind of slapped both sides in it.
I was on with you, I think.
And you were, and you did a hell of a job. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a great time. Even though, what I really remember is a time when Marty Glickman passed away, and you and Marv came on the show.
Yeah.
And that was a mitzvah. Thank you.
Marty was great.
It was the best. Where was I going on that? And we spent a lot of time on this, and I resolved to not use the word Redskin as best I could. I had this conversation with Mike Tirico, and he has his own feelings on the matter. And when you script a show, you can do it, but it's so ingrained in your habit. You try to, make it. And I did not feel like getting up on the soapbox saying, I'm not using this word anymore. Like, no, my decision. It's an uncomfortable word. Let's just not use it. But I'm telling you, in the course of a ad-lib program or discussion, it is very difficult to break that habit.
It is. I think I've substantially broken it, but I'm sure I've slipped from time to time. And if you're addressing the issue, you have to use the word. And there are also convenient arguments that people use. Here's something. This is generally true. It's not unique to me or to Bob, and it's not unique to sports issues. With exceptions, I think what all reasonable people appreciate is an informed discussion of the merits of an issue on either side with nuance and shadings.
Where do we see that in America today?
Not very much. And so what you get is not only anger at what your position may be, but more often than not, some kind of misrepresentation or caricature of that position, from which they then extrapolate a constellation of positions and viewpoints, which will spark the resentments of their perceived audience, so that you fall into that category, whatever it might be, of people that they detest or they have a problem with, and then they assign to you a motivation which is not worthy. It couldn't be that you actually think, oh, you're trying to call attention to yourself.
Now, how much of this is all happening on Twitter? All of it, right? Pretty much.
Well, it happens on Twitter, but it happens on the radio. It happens on television when they're discussing these things. They assign unworthy motivations to people with whom they disagree, and then they feel as if they have license to attack them on a personal basis, and usually it's someone they've never met or spoken to, and very little of it matches anything that's actually truthful. I don't have any problem when someone disagrees with me, but you can't be expected to defend the position you do not hold. You know, if they just assign it to you because it makes it easier for them to swat at that straw man.
We have gone far afield of a number of things. So one thing I wanted to ask you,
I've never had to do that.
Well, no.
Leeway.
I tell you what, though, the one thing, and it steps back a few decades. If those of you in the room have never seen Bob's eulogy for Mickey Mantle, if you do nothing else today, go find it.
Oh, thank you.
On YouTube. I can remember walking into that first Yankee game when I was 6 in 1961, that green field, and almost getting a foul ball that day off the Mick. I can remember, the pain when he died. We all felt that. But you were tasked with encapsulating, I think, the voice of the thoughts, the tears, the ache of a generation of people.
Well, that's who I was directing it toward. It wasn't so much that I was speaking for myself. I was hoping that I captured the feelings of millions of people, and it was a very gratifying response that told me that I at least came close to that. I think that over the years, I don't expect that people would have paid close attention to me. I'm always appreciative when it seems as if they have. But over the years, I think you'd find that there was a texture to what I did. I could, when given the opportunity, tackle issues and be serious. I also could be goofy and I hope humorous. I could be sentimental. I could be a bit of a sports nerd if you just wanted to deal with the statistics and the history of it. And I always felt that a good sports broadcast, or at least over time, let's say over the 3 weeks of an Olympics, or over the course of a baseball season, that a good broadcaster would be somewhat like a good issue of Sports Illustrated that had beautiful photography, or in the case of television, visuals, beautiful photography, good writing, journalism, commentary, humor, nostalgia, all those things. Maybe not every issue, but over time, and maybe not every broadcast, but over time, all those notes on the scale. I don't think every broadcaster accomplishes that. Some are just good in a narrow lane. But I think that over time, I hope that I've accomplished that. And when people just want to define you as one thing, usually the thing that tees you up for them to take a swing at you, that's a little disappointing.
No, but that essay was just so eloquent and to the moment, and as gracious and eloquent as it was, also in the same arc of your career, I came across something on YouTube. You're running down the track at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
That's Jimmy Fallon.
Bag over your head, and
Yeah.
you got kidnapped by Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah. Jimmy has a bit. Do you have it? Are you about to leave?
No, I wish.
Jimmy has a bit that he calls head swap. And he takes the head of one person, puts it theoretically on the body of another. So I don't like Howard Stern's head goes on Jennifer Aniston's body or some crazy thing. And then they put dialogue to it. And if they execute it properly, it's hilarity ensues.
Yeah, in the back of a car with a bag over his head.
Yeah, we were in Indianapolis, and the premise was that they had kidnapped me so that I would give them Super Bowl tickets because the Giants were playing the Patriots in Indy.
What we're going to do, we're going to expand our seating up here just temporarily, but as we're doing that, I think we're going to take a question or two, BJ?
Yeah, we'll see if any of you have any questions. There are mic stands at either end. We're going to have more time for Q&A after. We're going to bring up two of our students, as I mentioned. In my sports media class, I mentioned to our very engaged students that Bob Costas was coming to games. And their eyes got really big. And then I said, we're going to run a contest, and we're going to bring two of our students up here where ask questions. They all thought I was crazy. And I said, no, really, I need you to write. I need you to ask questions because we need your point of view. And so we have two of them here, today. And one of them, his name is Ronald Castaneda, rather, is a junior visual and sound media major from Newark, New Jersey. And we also have Michael Daly, a sophomore visual and sound media major from Bayonne, New Jersey. So I'd like to bring these two up on the stage right now as we're getting their chairs up here. We have time for one or two questions.
Any
so
questions?
If you have a question, you can make your way over to one of the mic stands. And as we're setting that up, we can...
I can't believe we answered every concern or question, Ron.
I don't think we have.
We haven't even warmed up here yet.
we have one question over here to the gentleman.
Yes, sir.
Over here.
Hi, Stu Hodem, and wanted to follow up on the Marty Glickman reference. But first of all, could you show us your Mickey Mantle card?
There's a story here. First, there you go.
Every right-thinking American. Huh?
Right. It goes like this. Like many kids, millions of kids growing up in the late 50s and through the 60s, you collected Topps baseball cards. Kids do that today, but they do it as an investment. We did it for emotional and sentimental reasons. You got 5 of them in a pack for a nickel with that chalky rectangular piece of gum, which if you dropped it on the pavement would shatter like a piece of glass. And you didn't waste a Mickey Mantle or a Willie Mays for this, but you put Hector Lopez or Jerry Lumpy on the spokes of your bike, so when you pedaled around the neighborhood, it made a very cool flapping sound. And you traded them, and you flipped them, and you matched them and dematched them, and then they went in a shoebox, and you categorized them by position or by league or whatever, and then you went off to college, and your mother cleaned out the closet, and she threw them away. So,
And you came home and you screamed.
yeah, well, one that survived the purge was this '58 mantle, which was the first mantle I'd gotten because I was 6 years old in 1958. It was the first year that I had baseball cards. And so I thought, well, it'd be a sacrilege to throw it away. So I tucked it away and never said anything about it. And Tony Kubek, who I did the baseball game of the week with in the 80s on NBC, was Mickey's teammate on great Yankee teams, the shortstop. And when he caught a glimpse of it, he then mentioned it on the game the next day. And Sports Illustrated wrote about it the next week. And ever since then, people have asked, as this gentleman did, not a setup, they've asked 3 or 4 times a week.
Same card?
No, it's the same card, 58 All-Star card,
Right.
but what started to happen after it got publicized is people, complete strangers, would send them to me as birthday and Christmas gifts. You have those boxes in newspapers, today's birthdays. That's how I know I'm younger than William Shatner and older than Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah.
Or both of them were born on March 22nd.
But more relevant.
Yeah. But in any case, so I probably over the years have gotten a couple dozen of them, and when this one gets too dog-eared, and I've got a few of them that are laminated, but when this one gets too dog-eared, then I'll exchange it for another one. But I can't go anywhere. And they always say I keep it in the wallet, but actually if I have a suit on, I'll put it here because you can reach it more readily. But even if I'm in like jeans and a t-shirt, I'm just going to get a cup of coffee, I have to tuck it in my back pocket because a few times I've bumped into somebody and says, oh my gosh, I don't have it, and the guy thinks I'm a fraud. So can't be done.
Turn it over to our
Was there a question? Or that was it? Okay, thank you.
Oh, Marty Glickman.
I was going to say, on a recent podcast, you compared the analytical ability of Tom Seaver to George Carlin and Jerry Seinfeld in breaking down their respective professions.
Yes.
Pitching and comedy. Was Marty Glickman their equal in sports broadcasting, and what's the most important advice or critique he shared with you that might apply to students today?
Well, Marty Glickman, for those who don't know, first of all, was a world-class athlete. He played football and basketball and ran track at Syracuse University in the 30s, and he was on the U.S. Olympic team, teammate of Jesse Owens, in 1936 in Berlin. And he and Sam Stoller, who were on the team, were Jewish athletes, and both the U.S. track coach and the head of the U.S. delegation, they were both blatantly anti-Semitic and quite likely racist, but Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf were the 2 fastest sprinters in America. Marty Glickman might have been the 3rd fastest man in America. Owens had already apparently embarrassed Hitler. It's a well-known story, by winning gold medals right under Hitler's nose as he watched from his reviewing stand. And then it came time for the 4x100 relay, which would have included Stoller and Glickman. And they were told that they wouldn't run. And Owens himself got up in the meeting and said, let Sam and Marty run, we'll win no matter what. And he was told, according to Marty, shut up, you'll do as you're told. And Marty believed to his dying day that the reason for this was that Owens and Metcalf, African-American athletes, had infuriated Hitler, and now they weren't going to let Jewish athletes do the same. And a few months later, Glickman and Stoller did run in an international meet against virtually the same competition with Owens and Metcalf, and they did win handily. So then, anyway, Marty goes on from there to become not a color commentator or analyst, but a great play-by-play man who had a distinctive and vibrant voice that was just brimming with energy. He often said, I want people to feel as if I'm almost playing the game. And that's the way I feel. And as a former athlete, he could do that authentically. He was great on radio football, but he was especially great on basketball because he practically invented the terminology. Top of the key, out on the wing, off the dribble. His call for a basket, his protege Marv Albert came up with yes, but Marty's call was swish, which when you think of it is so descriptive because that's the sound of the ball passing through the net. And you could almost feel the rhythm and flow of a game when Marty did it, and then when his protege Marv Albert did it, especially on the radio. And Marty, unlike some people in the business, not most, but some, who want to see others fail or resent it when others do well, Marty was such a generous soul that he reveled in others doing well and reveled in being able to pass on his knowledge to young aspiring broadcasters. And the best, I'm sure he gave other advice to other people, but his advice to me was, you look so young, like I was 30 years old then, it looked like I was 15. You look so young, and you have so much in your head. You're speaking too rapidly. You never hear an older, mature person speak too rapidly. Slow down. That was his best advice to me.
And he is so seminal, especially in the 50s, to basketball. If you read Jack Kerouac,
Yes.
On the Road, which,
Yes.
by the way, Irsay, I think, still owns the script of that book.
Jim Irsay
Jim
owns
Irsay,
it?
that
Yeah.
wrote that book, bought it for $2 million. But he has mentioned how that cat, Marty Glickman, with a rat-tat-tat.
That crazy cat.
Yeah, he's in On the Road, one of the great American novels. Michael and Ronald, you're here? Yep. Shoot, go ahead.
Bob, I'll start with you. So,
Which Bob?
Mr. Costas. Yes, I do
See,
have
there's
to
right out of the box, Michael, it's
Yeah.
a broadcasting error right there.
My apologies. This is not
Define
Stephen
your
F.
terms.
That was bound to happen at some point.
But I will say this, Mr. Costas. Mr. Lee here spoke about Mickey Mantle. And I think one thing that's interesting, not only about your career, but your life as well, is that growing up, you idolized Mickey Mantle, like I'm sure you did as well. Millions of children did. You were bestowed the honor to give the eulogy at his funeral. When his family approached you in 1995 to give the eulogy, what was that like?
Well, the service, as I remember, was on a Tuesday, and they only asked me on Saturday, so I didn't have that much time to think about it. I was, of course, flattered and honored, and I think it was fortunate that I understood that I was speaking only partially for myself. I was trying to do justice, and it was a little bit of a tightrope walk because you couldn't just gloss everything over. Mickey himself had acknowledged the conflicts in his life and the regrets and the shortcomings. So you had to figure out a way to delicately acknowledge that, but at the same time, not to gild the lily, but just to honestly lift up what he was at his best and what he meant, whether he realized it or not, what he meant to a generation of baseball fans. And I think that insight that was where I should go was what guided me.
So sports has constantly been regarded as a microcosm of life. both of you are prominent figures in the media. So what do you feel is the media's role within that microcosm?
I'll defer to this, Bob.
Well, we can't just stick to sports. We have to do what we do outside, off the field, as I said earlier, with preparation, thought, context, and accuracy. I think we see so often that sports is an analogy for various things in life. You know, there's a poetry about sports. There's a mythology we want to embrace. And baseball is handed down from generation to generation. Football imparts great values. Now, there are other issues with that sport. And so there is a nobility there. There are stories to be told. And I think it's a sanctuary. And I think it still remains. All the things that Bob and I have talked about up here, and obviously the headlines suggest, that still you can turn it on or you can go to an event. I mean, I'm a Mets fan. I'm sorry, but I confess, I cop to that. And thank you. There aren't many of us. But being at one of their few memorable games of this year before eventually it all receded again, as it always seems to, into a miasma of horror. But sitting there on that Saturday night game when they beat the Nats, and I'm not celebrating the Nats championship as part of the NL East. No, I am going to do that.
That was an amazing game.
It was, yeah. Saturday night game,
Yeah,
Citi Field.
Incredible game.
Yeah, and it's a community of people, and you know, you're sitting there and you're sharing and you're high-fiving strangers, and it's what the moment brings you to. It's what sports can be, even when the ideal maybe once that 27th out is recorded. All right, we're back to real life. From the confines of the moment, you can enjoy it, and it is a refuge. But it's also a place where there are hard stories, and you have to pick and choose the times to concentrate on each. But it teaches us all something about ourselves.
I agree with every word Bob just said. And if the games were not engaging, if they weren't in some sense appealing, in different ways, we overlap, but we don't all enjoy it in the same way exactly, but there's a whole lot about it to enjoy. And it connects us. It connects generations. It connects fathers and sons and mothers and daughters. There's tremendous value there. I don't see how anyone could listen to Bob or listen to me and think reasonably that we don't love sports. But I also don't see how you could reasonably say that issues have no place in sports. Did you miss the career of Jackie Robinson? Did you miss Muhammad Ali? Did you miss Billie Jean King or Arthur Ashe? Did you miss Marvin Miller and the labor movement in sports? Did you miss that there are issues about whether or not public funds should be devoted toward the building of stadiums? Did you miss what Megan Rapinoe is talking about, whether you agree with her entirely or not? Did not, for better or worse, the President of the United States further politicize the issue of players kneeling by calling them sons of bitches in front of a carefully selected audience in Huntsville, Alabama? Does that not have racial implications to it? Does not what Kaepernick did spark a discussion? You don't have to fully embrace Kaepernick. You don't have to. It's out there. The NBA in China is out there. On the Olympics, I would say that if 1% of what I addressed had something to do with something other than the events, the athletes, the results, 1% would be probably the amount. But that 1% is important. How can you do an Olympics from Beijing and not acknowledge that while the society is modernized, as I said to George Bush in that clip, they are still an authoritarian society with a horrible human rights record? We opened one night, and I give Dick Ebersol credit for this, he ran NBC Sports. One night we opened the broadcast from Tiananmen Square.
They let you do that?
Yes, just a reminder of where we are. If you're going to say, hey, look, here's the Great Wall, well, here's Tiananmen Square. And a lot of the things that I've cited, despite how some people may characterize any of us, and at opening ceremony, I forget which Olympics, Saudi Arabia comes in, and I say, the IOC has stated that its objective is to reach a 50-50 composition, female and male athletes. Therefore, worth noting, not a single woman is part of the Saudi Arabian delegation. Athlete, official, that's it.
Factual.
Just factual, just an acknowledgement, okay? Fox, at the World Series Game 5, Trump is in attendance. They put him on the big screen during a commercial, I think in the third inning. It was immediately met by thunderous boos, followed by chants of lock him up, lock him up. Now, you know that within seconds on social media, that's going to be everywhere. You know it's going to be all over cable news and talk radio and in the newspapers the next day. Fox News did not acknowledge it, but I would have...
Fox News or Fox Sports?
I'm sorry, Fox Sports.
Yeah.
Fox Sports,
Yeah.
doing it again. Did not acknowledge it. I don't know what the reasons were behind. They did not acknowledge it. Not only should that have been acknowledged, but this weekend in Tuscaloosa at the LSU-Alabama game, where he received a very favorable reception, that should also be acknowledged. It's just factual. When the IOC would not acknowledge at the opening ceremony the 40th anniversary of the Munich massacre in '72, I took it upon myself to mention that when the Israeli delegation came in. Is that a left-wing position, or is it just a common sense position? Is what I said about China a left-wing position, or is it a common sense position? But these things intersect. They inevitably, occasionally intersect. The place to discuss them at any length is not in between ball one, strike two, or when somebody goes to the free throw line. But on programs like yours, or on pregame shows or halftime shows, the NFL has a problem with domestic violence. If the Cowboys a few years ago signed Greg Hardy, a loathsome character, who not only was guilty of beating up his girlfriend, but he had literally had an arsenal spread out on the couch of assault weapons and everything else. Is that not to be acknowledged? You know, and these people who say, oh, I'm just trying to watch the game, they're very often the same people who complain with justification about snowflakes on campuses. Oh, you can't put up with anything that disturbs you, that disquiets you, but you can't put up with 2 minutes about the darker side of something in a 3.5-hour presentation? Get over it.
This question is actually for both Bobs here, making sure we differentiate. But
The name is spelled the same backwards, by the way.
it is, yes, it is. But one thing that I think is important is, and we talk about conflicts and struggles, interviewing. Sometimes there's a lot of tense situations. Most notably, your interview with Vince McMahon, your coverage in Cuba. There were a lot of tumultuous times, tense moments. For aspiring journalists and broadcasters, what advice do you have when they might be met with a situation like you guys had to deal with?
I'll tell you a story of an interview I did with Lance Armstrong in 2006. Now, here is a guy, and at that point, it had not all crashed down on him. The whispers were out there. We know that cycling was a dirty sport. Yeah. We know there was an untoward number of cyclists who had died at an early age from taking EPO because it clogs your arteries and bothers your heart. But he had still never failed a test.
Right.
Okay, well, what's the test? And so we and producer Justine Gubar and I had done a lot of work on this topic, and we had talked to Greg LeMond, 3-time American champion of the Tour de France. We had a source who had been on a team with Lance Armstrong who competed out of New Zealand. We had the journalist David Walsh, who wrote the incredible book about the masseur, Emma O'Reilly, who had worked on Armstrong. And we had talked to people who had been in the room, in the hospital, when he was being treated as a cancer patient, and had admitted, great try, no matter what you think of Armstrong, he beat an unbeatable cancer. But in the course of that, he admitted to his physicians, in front of witnesses, what he had taken. So we had this nailed 9 ways from Sunday. And now he's agreed to come on. He's in a studio in Los Angeles, and I'm in Bristol. And we went for about 12 minutes. And it was a great, I point to that only because you just ask a factual question. Why did that happen? I don't know. Why did that happen? I don't know. And it's, people will tell you things by the way they don't tell you things. And when you lay out the foundation, boom, well, this person says that person says that. Why do all these people who have never met all say the same thing about you? He didn't have an answer for that. Now, to show you how self-focused this particular individual is, and I know his life's gone through some changes since then, he got off the air, ran into a buddy of mine, Charlie Steiner, about a week later down in Baja, where they ran into each other on vacation. Hey, I was on with Bobby. It was a great interview. And it was because you ask a factual question, you lay the foundation, you don't make it pejorative, you don't make it about yourself. The interview's about the answers and about what you're trying to do. And so, if there is a tension in the air, I'm just asking a factual question. You don't make it what we call a loaded question. Get the value out of it. And you're not there to make friends. And the interview's not about you. There are some programs where the interview is about the interviewer, and you can watch and see how that's done, the way they edit it. The interview's about the viewer and what you're going to come away with in terms of an impression, and you make the decision how forthcoming was that person.
Yeah, well said. You need to be prepared. First of all, you need to be prepared, so that if you're challenged beyond the question itself, you need to have some knowledge beyond that question in case you have to go to point B, C, or D. You have to be sure in your preparation, but especially in a long-form interview. Now, this varies. Most of what you did, not all, newsmaker interviews.
Right.
I've done a lot of both, so you could be sitting talking with Bruce Springsteen about his career, but you still can't be, you have to be well prepared, but you can't always do the interview, or for that matter, the broadcast that you bring to the booth for a ball game. You can't do the broadcast or interview that you brought in your briefcase 100%. You can't be locked into it. You have to be nimble enough to be spontaneous and go in whatever direction either the event or the conversation takes you. So if you think that question 3 is what you're going to ask after question 2, but halfway through the response to question 2, the person says, that was before I ran into Eva Braun in Argentina, you'd better be willing to follow up on that.
Right.
You know? And nimble enough to do so.
And actually, if I may, a lot of times when you're preparing for an interview, you have your set list of questions, but also I think the important thing is listening, especially for an interview.
You have to
Do you
listen.
know how many people conduct interviews that never listen?
Yes, a lot. There's a lot.
An uncommonly large number.
Yeah.
Most important question you can ask in the middle of an interview when you hear something interesting, 3 letters. Why? I'm telling you, you unlock people with that question. You get to the germ of their thinking.
You mentioned Vince McMahon. When I interviewed McMahon on HBO in either 2001 or 2002.
2001.
Yeah, 2001.
Don't mess with this guy.
I'll take your word for it. He's come prepared. First of all, it's HBO, so there's no commercials, all right? It was scheduled for 15 minutes. Ross Greenberg is in my ear saying, keep going, this is good television. And it was 27 minutes of almost unremitting tension. And in retrospect, especially then, he wasn't used to doing real interviews. He was used to doing these staged WWF then interviews in which he could play his Vince McMahon character. And I was asking him legitimate, straightforward questions, first about the XFL, which was one of the great disasters in the history of sports and of television, which was fresh in everyone's mind then, and then about the changing tone of the WWF. When we were young, watching wrestling, it was sort of it was a lovable, tongue-in-cheek soap opera. Yeah. Haystack
Saturday mornings.
Right, Saturday mornings. Bruno Sammartino, Bobo Brazil, the lovely Miss Elizabeth, who was like, a damsel in distress tied to the railroad tracks. But it wasn't this kind of steroid-infused, crotch-grabbing, women-denigrating, just assault on the senses, which is what it had become. And so I challenged him on all that. And Vince is not stupid. And if you read a transcript of that interview, I think many people would call it a draw. But because he lost his temper and his face was flushed, heaven knows what he might have been on top of it, but his face was flushed, the veins in his neck and in his temple are bulging out. He's thrusting a finger at me. A lot of people thought he was going to throttle me. He came forward in his chair. He weighs twice as much and has bad intentions. But maybe I'm just dense. But I didn't think he was going to, physically attack me. But I knew he was trying to intimidate me. So when he came forward in his chair, what the hell could I do? People say, like, well, I'm here, I'll go like this. Like, if he really wants to come get me, he can come get me. So when he came forward, I did this and smiled at him.
Yes.
And that really set him off.
That's not how the script's supposed to go.
Right. And he got more and more angry. So I believed, to most people, I prevailed on tone because he lost it and I stayed calm. Side note, no commercials. So when he finally, I thank him, he storms off. You can hear the door slamming behind him and he's muttering to himself, and I'm told that in the green room he's throwing stuff around. So there's only a 30-second bumper to get me from one part of the set to the next. For the next guest, Bobby Knight. And I said, Coach, this is the one time when your presence has lowered the temperature in the room. So now the show is finally over. We hit the 60-minute mark. The show is over. And now the stage manager and the cameraman and all the techs come up and they go, hey, Bob, don't worry. We had your back. Wait a minute, this madman is this close to me and you're over there. You know, I doubt you would have done me much good.
Ronald, I'm going to get a question from you, but before you ask it, we do have mics set up for questions. So if you do have some Q&A in mind, you can queue up there, no pun intended, and have you ask a final question here.
So going off of that, Mr. Costas, you don't shy away from stating your opinions on certain matters. Would you recommend that for every other news or sportscaster, even if they're just getting started in their career?
Well, it depends upon the context. First of all, in a news broadcast, except when it's clearly labeled as commentary, and there have been, it doesn't happen so much anymore, but you know, back in the day, Eric Severide or someone would do a commentary on the CBS News, or Andy Rooney would do commentaries on 60 Minutes. Unless it's clearly delineated that way, no. And when someone is just starting, well, maybe on the campus station, yes. But if you're just starting in your professional career, it's not a wise professional choice. Plus, you don't have the acceptance from the audience and the credibility to do it. But even if you have gained, you hope, that acceptance and that credibility, especially in this environment, you've got to be willing. You could say, here's my opinion, it's a good idea to give milk to orphans, and there would be somebody out there that hated you for saying that. And you had to be willing to take that or just shut up.
Yeah. Michael and Ronald, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For being part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Great job, guys.
Thank you.
And
We're going to take one question from each side, and stay where you are, questioners, because we're going to leave some time at the end. So one question for each side. We'll start with the young lady as we're miking up our student athletes.
Thank you both for coming to speak to us today. Greatly appreciate your insights. I've certainly learned a lot here. My name is Danielle. I'm a graduate student in the MBA program here at Seton Hall, concentration in sport business. And my question for you both, whichever person would like to answer it, is that there's no doubt that OTT is a trend in the industry, so streaming over-the-top media, for those that aren't familiar with the term. And you've just said here today that media, particularly sports media, is the industry where the buyer has to flatter the seller. At what point do you think that particular form of media will reach its breaking point where the consumer feels that the perceived value they're getting from subscribing to all of the different OTT platforms is too expensive and that perceived value is less than what they're getting?
Boy, there's a big shakeout coming in the world of streaming. I don't know how many articles you've seen in the past week on streaming. I mean, Wall Street Journal, I think USA Today, New York Times. Disney Plus is about to sign on. They're bundling it with ESPN Plus and Hulu for less than the cost of Netflix. There's going to be a whole shakedown cruise in the whole world of streaming that I don't think anybody can predict. 5 years ago, you couldn't have predicted we would be at this point. But I think the point is, and I think it's inherent in your question, I think the consumer's in charge. I mean, Netflix, their primacy is in danger. Apple Plus, I just updated my computer last night with the new operating system, which I hate. But now they got the Apple Plus logo there, but they have no library. Point is, everyone in this, you'll be in charge. Your Visa bill will determine, I think, what happens.
This doesn't go directly to your question, Danielle, but when we talk about the explosions in technology, no matter what form it takes, it's one thing if you're just presenting games. People have access to more games than ever before. There are sports-specific networks for every sport, and ESPN has a dozen platforms or more. If you're talking about events, then it's just, here's your smorgasbord. But whether it's a website, whether it's talk radio, cable, this may be some pie-in-the-sky hope. But to me, what matters is truth, credibility, and quality. All right? And when I say quality, I don't mean it has to be solemn. There are sitcoms that are of better quality than other sitcoms. You're looking for good quality. If something was worthwhile and true, it was worthwhile and true if it came off Gutenberg's printing press, or if now someone is putting it out there on a device I don't even understand. But if it was crappy, or if it was worse yet, a lie, then it was a lie if a caveman carved it on the wall of a cave with a jagged rock. And it's a lie if it shows up on Deadspin or wherever else, no matter how much, if it is a lie. I'm not saying it's all a lie, but if it is a lie, or if it's just gratuitously mean-spirited and part of that kind of corrosive assault on basic civility that is on steroids in this culture, then it can't be justified. And it can't be justified by saying, oh, come on, Grandpa, stop yelling at the kids on your lawn. Hey, just because I want to hold a newspaper in my hand with a cup of coffee in the morning because that's how I grew up, that doesn't mean that what's on a tablet isn't just as worthwhile or better. But the question is, does it pass that very basic test of truth and quality? In that case, the more the merrier. But the truth is, it's like American Idol auditions. If you open up the doors that wide, there are going to be some pearls in the oyster that will come through, some delightful surprises, but the general quality will be lousy. And the more that's out there, the more good stuff, but the general average quality, not so good.
We'll take one question over here, and then we'll welcome our student athletes.
Thank you both for sharing your time. Bob Lee, I want to thank you, especially the miasma of horror will be the name of all of my fantasy teams from this day forward.
Be sure to fold late like the Mets do. Come back making the board run and still come back to the
Too
pack.
late. The fold already happened. Can you guys, if you would please, both impart to the budding sports broadcasters and sports journalists here some nugget that might help them, Mr. Costas, in your words, to become an oyster, a pearl rather than an oyster?
Well, I think Bob would agree with this. Broadcasting is a knack as much as anything else. You can develop the knack, but you could have a very bright, very dedicated young man or woman, and certainly you should dedicate yourself in the classroom because you want to have as well-rounded an education as possible. If you become a broadcaster, the broader your frame of reference, the better a broadcaster you'll be. Plus, you never know what route you'll wind up taking, and don't put all your eggs in that single broadcasting basket. But no one can teach you how to be a broadcaster. I'm not minimizing the importance of these professions, but there is a path to becoming a doctor or to becoming a lawyer. How good you are depends, but there's a specific path to follow. In broadcasting, it's not that cut and dry. And the way you learn to do it, especially if you're talking about play-by-play, the way you learn to do it is by doing it. I'm sure that Al Michaels learned much more about being a broadcaster with the Hawaii Islanders than he did in any classroom at Arizona State. That's just the way it works.
And one of the keys, I think, is to develop, no pun intended, your own voice. And that applies whether you're on the air or and there are far more people who aren't on the air. They're making people like us look good, producers, researchers, dare we even say executives. But to get to those positions too, your own voice, communication, be able to write, be distinctive. How do you separate yourself from the pack? How do you make yourself more valuable to a potential employer? It used to be you'd print your CV or your resume on fluorescent purple paper and so it would stick out. But now you have the ability through the digital democracy of YouTube and putting your own channels together to distinguish yourself. The basics are taken for granted. You'd like to think everybody walking through the door has that suite of skills. but how you use it, how you build on the basics. So, oh, I know him or her. Yes, I read that. That's a great take. And to do it consistently. It's not something that happens overnight, but to be distinctive is, I think, something to be aiming for.
And I know we have people lined up, so I'll make this brief. To have a good take in our minds is not the same thing as having a hot take.
No.
And a lot of young people think that the best way, that their models are the guy who's in a state of high dudgeon on their local sports radio and wants the coach fired because of yesterday's loss. And the more extreme and the more angry and the more over the top their response to anything, then the more honest they are, the more tell it like it is they are. And perhaps that does draw in a certain audience, but it isn't, it's nowhere near the high road. It's a pretty low road.
Stay where you are or sit down right in your spots. We're going to have time for more questions at the very end, but I want to bring up our two student athletes to the stage. First, we have Lizzie Winn, who's a senior golfer from Sylvania, Ohio. In addition to being an all Big East performer, she is twice qualified for LPGA events. Cool. And also, and Ryan McNeely, a senior cross-country runner from Rutherford, New Jersey. He's also a member of the leadership program in the Stillman School of Business. So please welcome Lizzie and Ryan.
Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Have at us.
Go for it.
Well, first, on behalf of the students and Seton Hall Athletics, I want to say thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so much.
So my question revolves around the NCAA and the new recent legislation change. Seeing that now the NCAA has allowed us, or us as student athletes, to monetize our likeness, how do you see, as professionals in the sports media industry, this will cause a change in college athletics and how we, or student athletes moving forward, will utilize this and utilize sports media?
Well, you're a cross-country guy, right?
I am. The most popular sport.
I was going to say, what do you think this newfound freedom is going to mean to you and your teammates? I mean, it's hard to see it as anything else but, well, first California led the way with the first piece of legislation, but NCAA never acts. It always reacts. It knows that it's just the one right judge on the right day away from having this incremental change suddenly become cataclysmic and sudden change. And I think something like this, monetize your likeness, you're just stratifying the revenue sports and the non-revenue sports. And it's just, you'll have a gulf between. And even within the confines of say, the Alabama football team. I mean, third string long snapper, what's he coming away with?
Nothing.
You know, exactly. So I think it reads well. It's meant to look like reform, but in practice, I think it comes up way short.
No one can deny the basic principle that Ed O'Bannon, whose name was on the suit, brought years ago. Wait a minute, here's a video game, and it's my image. Years and years after I played at UCLA, I'm getting nothing, all right? And what sense does it make, since athletes have to practice and travel and they can't work like other students can if they feel like they have the opportunity and they have the time? Why shouldn't they receive some kind of stipend? And that's in place now, or in the process of being put in place. And why, if you're a Heisman Trophy candidate at Ohio State and the local car dealer, the university isn't paying you, the local car dealer wants to pay you to make appearances or make commercials, why not? Okay, fine. But what I have a problem with is the implication, and you hear this all the time, everybody's getting rich off of this except for the athletes. The implication there is that the education itself is worthless. But how many of their fellow students will leave saddled with significant student debt? And how many of the parents of those students worked 2 jobs or scrimped and saved to put them and their siblings through college, which in some cases costs hundreds of thousands of dollars over time? You're a full scholar, no, I'm saying you, I'm speaking universally, a full scholarship athlete. There's tremendous value in that scholarship if you take it seriously. And it seems to me that if we're going to go with the premise of they ain't getting nothing, that you're waving the white flag and admitting the whole thing is a sham. And, you know, we know that it's largely corrupt in many places. And one good way, not to correct all of it, but I think the single step that would correct more of it than anything else is going back to the old model of freshman ineligible. And I don't care if you're a freshman coming in with a 1600 on the SAT who's a potential Rhodes Scholar, or a marginal student who's going to need tutorial help. You should have to establish yourself on a campus, get acclimated to it, and prove that you're a legitimate student, and then you can have a 4-year athletic scholarship waiting for you after that. And there's also no disgrace in not going to college. Nobody says that hockey players and baseball players who don't go to college have somehow threatened the course of Western civilization. It's only because we expect the best basketball and football players to perform in college. But you should have to establish that you're here for a good reason and for what is at least an equal reason and should be the primary reason, which is to attend school. You could be a freshman football player and play a game before you ever go to a class. You could play an August game before you ever go to a class. You could be a basketball player. Your first Thanksgiving as a student, you could be at the Great Alaska Shootout or someplace in Hawaii. What does that tell even a bright but impressionable 18 or 19-year-old kid about why he or she is really here? That's fundamentally corrupt.
You realize you just blew up the NBA draft, but it's another story for another time.
They would adjust. And more so than football, their position, they've got the G League, which used to be the D League. They could easily have a fully functioning farm system. Easily.
Yeah.
And by the way, if a player goes to play and doesn't make the NBA, if they don't play in the NBA, if they're playing in the NBA, they're not college eligible anymore. But let's suppose you go and you turn out not to be as good as you hoped, or you break your leg, you can come back and be a scholarship athlete. Yeah. Maybe not with a broken leg, now that I think of it, but you get my point.
Yeah. Lizzie.
So, as a female student athlete, I would love to know your take on how do you think sports media has changed for women, specifically opportunities, growth, maybe challenges that they would face. I would just love to know your take on it.
I got to tell you, I have seen, not just by numbers, but by qualities of the people involved, not just behind the scenes in front of the camera. I've seen, I think, significant growth in the last 15 or 20 years. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about, and there is a meritocracy because for all the reasons Bob and I have been talking about for the last few minutes, people at home are so critical. The bar is set so high editorially, you've got to have your stuff down. So anybody who's out there has to be prepared. And I am totally enthused about that. I mean, outside the lines, when I left that program, the 3 producers and the lead producer, all 3 of them were women. That didn't register to me every day when I'm going to class. It sounds like some of my best friends are women, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. I saw it displayed in the workplace I worked in. I think you probably saw the same thing. I'd like to think it needs to be better at the senior executive level. That's where change comes, really. That's where the thinking isn't just like, oh, geez, we're counting heads. No, it's ingrained in the ethic and in the practice of a company.
When I started and throughout the early stages of my career, a female sports broadcaster was a novelty. Now it's taken for granted. Their numbers have grown exponentially, and except in a few Neanderthal sectors, I think they're judged simply on their credibility and quality. No one thinks anything of it when a woman is commenting on a sport that she has not played, like let's say Jessica Mendoza played softball at a very high level. She didn't play baseball, but her credibility comes from the quality of her comments. Women do not play football, but they can host football shows. No one thinks that Hannah Storm doesn't know what she's talking about. I think the next frontier, however, is in the play-by-play realm. There are a handful, Beth Mowins,
Gail Sirens,
who's since retired, but a few others. But there is with the audience, and it will take some getting used to, even those who accept female broadcasters in every other role, they're used to hearing a male voice on play-by-play. And somebody who's exceptionally good, maybe a few somebodies, are going to have to crack that glass ceiling. But other than that, and when you talk about on the air, I think it's moving, that train is moving quickly in the right direction.
Is there a better soccer host than my good friend Rebecca Lowe?
No, she's great.
I mean, I worked with her on the World Cup back in 2011. I love her, and
She's fantastic.
she knows it cold better than
Yeah,
5 times
she's
better
great.
than me. Anyway.
So my next question, I know controversy always follows sports. And seeing that throughout your long careers, you guys have built relationships with athletes, coaches, and organizations, and seeing that both of you have prominently talked about how you are willing to talk about controversial issues, even though it might not line up with the agenda of the network or the higher-ups, how have you found it, maybe you could shed a little bit more light upon yourselves to stay true to your core beliefs and say what you believe needs to be said rather than what the network wants you to say?
Well, all people on air, which is the point Stephen A. Smith was making on this very stage back in April, are not created equal. And, you know, speaking bluntly, when Bob Costas, or I'll even be modestly saying, if I'm in the chair with, you know, years of experience, I think you get a little bit more leeway, as Bob would, in many, if not most cases, of what you want to say. You also learn a way to say it, a way to negotiate the political winds and twists and turns and currents. And I think how you say it is as important as what you say. And that is, I think, is essential. You can't walk around with a samurai sword or a big hammer all the time. All these issues are not nails. But there are core issues that are important. And I will remember the day, if you remember, it was not our finest hour at ESPN, when League of Denial, which was a book by the Fainaru brothers and was going to be a co-branded documentary on PBS, the National Football League had ESPN take its association away, the Outside the Lines name, away from that. That was on page 1 of the New York Times. To say I was pissed off is to say it mildly. And the whole staff was like that. As fate would have it, and God smiles, that very day there was a story came across my computer from a contact at Boston University of a fairly major advance in CTE research. So the day that was on page 1 of the New York Times, I made damn sure that other story with a guest, Dr. Bob Stern, was on our show. And I took a step back from that, took a deep breath, and say, well, are we doing the right? Yes, we're doing the right thing, but the timing was cosmic. So sometimes you have to measure what you're doing and know who you're dealing with. But you got core values, you got to stick with them.
Maybe this answers at least part of your question. In my case, my career was pretty diverse. I've done stuff outside sports, which I enjoyed very much. I was a host and an interviewer and a reporter, but also a play-by-play man. And I didn't think I should say to myself, hey, I grew up wanting to call the World Series. I'm not going to call the World Series because we also don't have a journalistic show to examine everything that's wrong with baseball. There was a balance for me. But over time, especially when it came to the NFL, I was able to make my peace with it as long as I felt that at least often enough I could address the elephants in the room. And my feeling was, if you do that in front of the biggest audiences, I could have done it more frequently if I was on NPR or on HBO, even longer than I was on HBO, and I could have done it more frequently and done it in greater depth. But it has a different impact if you do it in front of that audience and if you're, in some sense, part of the presentation. Sometimes the field is behind you, or you're on the anchor desk at the Olympics. That has a greater impact, even if it's only 2 minutes out of 4 hours of prime time. It has a greater impact than even the best written story in the New York Times might have had. And I was able to feel comfortable with that until little by little the vice closed and the proportions just weren't acceptable to me anymore. And that goes back to, my parting company with NBC, but still with, in the big picture, tremendous appreciation for those 40 years and everything that it meant to me, and for the friendships, not just with the people I worked with, but for the people I worked for. You can disagree with somebody, sometimes emphatically, and still respect and like them, and I'd like to believe that that's the way it ended.
You don't see that enough in the U.S. culture these days, it seems, too, that last quality.
So going off of Ryan's question, now you're both storytellers. You've interviewed many athletes. How do you establish that relationship with your athlete that you're interviewing, and how do you break that barrier in order to tell the story that you and them want you to tell?
You know, here's something it's inevitable. I think back to the 1980s and the 1990s, looks like covering baseball. I was close to a contemporary of Ozzie Smith. I was close to a contemporary of Greg Maddux. I could relate to them. I could see myself having a beer with them. Now I'm older than almost all the managers, let alone older than all the players. You know, when I broke in, there were veteran players who were older than me. It's just not realistic to think that I'm going to have the same frame of reference and automatically the same kind of ease around a 23-year-old outfielder that I might have when I was 30 years old and doing it. So it's a different way in, but on the other hand, when we've been doing it this long, and all these men and women grew up watching television, by and large, they know who we are. And so that actually gives us a leg up over most of our colleagues. They recognize us coming in. And generally, not always, generally they have a favorable feeling towards it. So that gives us an entree.
And it's a conversation with someone, just similar to the conversation we're having right here. If you project the right values, the right vibe, you show you've done your homework. You mentioned the age of players. I talked to somebody who's a team broadcaster who is in our age cohort, which is Medicare, and he said, you know, I don't even talk to the players anymore. There's nothing to talk about. Oh, okay. And so, all right, and it, you know, does a very successful thing, but it's very basic. It's establishing that simpatico. We're here to talk about, and it's one thing to talk about the batting cage and around a team. That's one aspect. If you're going to try to do a deep dive feature with somebody, you're going to spend several days with them. And so I think what did I have in common with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, the former Chris Jackson, who refused to stand for the national anthem back in 1990 when he played in the NBA. We went down to Mississippi back in that era, 20 some odd years ago. Here, you know, white guy from Jersey, and here's a black kid from Mississippi, and you know, did not stand for the national anthem. But you know, his college or his high school coach was a POW in Germany who had lost a limb in service of this country, and these two guys embrace. And so you see something like that, you realize, you know, you spend time with somebody, you're going to get on the same page, the same wavelength, and you're going to be able to ask the questions to which you're going to be happy with the answers.
All right, let's thank our student athletes.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you, Ryan.
Nice to meet you.
All right, we're running short on time. We have time for a few questions. We'll start on this side of the room.
We'll try to do shorter answers, especially me.
It's a lightning round.
I would ask you direct your questions to one of the Bobs so we can get to as many questions as possible. So we'll start with this gentleman over here.
So hi, I'm a freshman here at Seton Hall. So that means I've only gotten to, like, I guess, consume a portion of your careers. But from what I've been able to consume, Mr. Lee, with your investigation of the Rutgers basketball program a few years ago, and Mr. Costas with your interview of Jerry Sandusky, when you do these risky topics, how do you learn to separate the story from the people that you're affecting when you report on it?
It's a great question.
Well, you know, one of the things I learned early on when we were doing stories with Outside the Lines, and I had to impart it to some of our younger staff members, is that when you do real news, real investigation, people do get hurt. It is a fact of life. I can remember we did an interview on a sexually exploitative swim coach back in the 90s, and one of our producers got one of the women who had been exploited by this man to speak on camera, and we learned 2 days later she attempted suicide. Thank God she was not successful, and she's fine now. But when you're I won't say party to, but when you're in the mix of something like that, it reminds you. And even if it's not something as drastic as that, you have real world consequences to what you do, which just triples down the need to be accurate and fair.
I'll go to the specific you cited. When I was interviewing Jerry Sandusky, I confined it to the allegations against him and questions that concerned his alleged behavior. But at the same time, I knew that would play into another story, which was the culture, or as people perceived it, at Penn State and around Penn State football, and specifically Joe Paterno. If the very same thing had happened at virtually, let's say 95% of other universities that had prominent football programs, it would have been every bit as tragic for the victims, and it certainly would be a story. But it wouldn't have had the same level of public fascination because it involved St. Joe Paterno. And I don't say St. Joe Paterno sarcastically, because no matter how you feel about this and what it says about his legacy, it is undeniable that Joe Paterno did many, many good and admirable things over the course of his life. So if you didn't have that contrast, that juxtaposition between the great experiment, as they called it, we can have a nationally ranked football team, and the players can graduate, they can be legitimate students, the coach can say no to the NFL, he can raise and donate millions of dollars for the library and all this other stuff, and we can feel good about going to the football games because we think it's part of a culture that's worthwhile, and now this somehow happened within that culture. I knew that that was a larger story, and it would ripple through it, but in that moment, interviewing Sandusky, I just confined it to his alleged actions.
An interview for the, by the way, for which Bob received a News Emmy.
Oh, thank you.
That was, I mean, that's... Question.
I'd like to thank you very much for coming here. My question was to Mr. Costas. I first learned about you in your ESPN 30 for 30 film about Catching Hell regarding the Cubs and Steve Bartman.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. In the beginning of that, you were talking about the 1986 World Series and Bill Buckner's era. How would you say you interview people when describing a topic that can be very harmful and at times make them irate or discomfortable?
I think, first of all, if they have to be held to account, if you're interviewing Barry Bonds, if he ever comes around and wants to do an interview, you got to be direct about it. But if you're talking to Bill Buckner, who of course has since passed away, but Buckner was very unfairly vilified. His life was made miserable. You're not abdicating journalistic responsibility if your tone is empathetic and understanding toward a Bill Buckner. And in that situation, if it is, you're more likely to get an interesting and open response from him. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to every interview subject.
Yes, sir.
Hello, this is for Mr. Lay. My name is Nicholas Burgos, and I'm a freshman member of the Buccino Leadership Institute here at Seton Hall. And I'm currently conducting research for a paper in my English class on expansion of the college football playoff from 4 teams to 6 teams in a model similar to that of the NFL. And this could potentially open more paths to the playoff for Power 5 conference teams, at-large teams, or even Group of 5 champions. And there have been calls for expansion by a plethora of college football fans basically since the inception of the playoff. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on the current system and selection committee are, and what, if anything, you would do to change that.
Well, I tell you, it's clearly a bonanza for the company and the network I used to work for. I always thought the establishment and then the potential expansion of this playoff system would rest in the hands of the college presidents. But every college president, his primary responsibility, he has a provost, but every college president is integrally involved with making rain. It's about money. It's about getting money donated to the school. It's about increasing. I mean, Ohio State's athletic budget, I think, is $170 million a year. That's just the internals of theirs. So my point is, as if they had any doubt that that's professional football, with the one exception, the players don't get paid. I suspect it will be expanded. I suspect it will not be without issues, but it will happen because there's too much damn money to be made.
Surprising it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
I note that while there are many women in the audience, with the exception of our first questioner, Danielle, there are no women lined up to ask questions. You are welcome.
Thank you.
We'll take one right over here.
Hello, my name is Patrick Gary. I'm a senior at Homedale High School. This one's for Mr. Costas. You covered tons of sports. What was the greatest or most memorable experience you had covering sports?
There are so many of them, and many of the experiences were just sort of as a result of covering sports. To be in Barcelona when the Olympics were taking place, to be at the White House on multiple occasions, not, I might note, during the present administration, but on on just some of the things that have happened, the people that I've met, as a result of my involvement in sports. But if you're just talking about a single event, you know, it could be a 20-way tie for first, but when asked to single out one, I always say Muhammad Ali lighting the torch at the opening ceremony in Atlanta in 1996. It was such a closely guarded secret, and Dick Ebersol told me and Dick Enberg, we were co-hosting the opening ceremony, not going to tell you who it is, you will recognize him or her the instant you see him or her, but I want your reaction to be as spontaneous as that of the crowd. And you hear a lot of sounds at an arena or a stadium, but something you almost never hear is an audible gasp. And there were audible gasps when Muhammad Ali literally stepped out of the shadows, took the torch from Janet Evans, the great swimmer. And I think that almost everybody in that large crowd, and almost everybody, the millions watching at home, had the same combination of thoughts, because it wasn't just one thought. It was a complex coming together of things. Wait a minute. Here's Muhammad Ali, once the most nimble and beautiful of athletes, now trapped inside his Parkinson's syndrome. Once the most entertaining and voluble of athletes, can't speak. And yet there's something transmitted here that's as eloquent as anything that he had ever said when he was at his best. And here's this once polarizing figure embraced by a crowd in the relatively conservative South. Billy Payne, who now runs the Masters in Augusta, ran the Atlanta Olympics, and when Dick Ebersol suggested months before that it be Muhammad Ali, Billy Payne said, he may be a hero to you, but to us in the South, he's a draft dodger. Billy Payne was wrong. It was a moment of reconciliation where people recognize it. Think all these thoughts coming together all at once. Wait a minute, no matter how you felt about him, not just when he refused the draft, but he made a number of statements that challenged the status quo. Statements about black pride and empowerment, youthful challenge to the establishment. No matter how you felt, you realize that over the course of time, this guy had proven himself, that even little blue-haired ladies from Omaha, most of them, loved Muhammad Ali. That there was something inherently decent and lovable about him, but there was also integrity and morality in what he did. He didn't just send out a tweet. He gave up 3 prime years of his career and didn't know if it would be his entire career. Didn't know if he might go to prison and the millions of dollars lost. There's integrity and real meaning in that. And an appreciation and an understanding of all those disparate dynamics came together in that one moment. So if I had to pick one, that's the answer.
And if you wonder why Dick Ebersol was and still is a hell of a producer, not telling you guys.
Right.
That
was smart.
That was real smart, and we played it earlier. It's an electric moment.
All right, well, that's all we have time for.
Oh, no! Oh, no!
Okay.
I feel bad for these people. Let's go to the lightning round. I'm not the producer
lightning
of this,
round.
but let's do it.
All right, 15-second answers, 10-second questions.
All right,
Questions.
I'll
Quick
make it
answers.
quick. Bill Healy, class of 78, communications major. Thank you for being here. I'm thinking of that rocket you set off on the 4th of July and then the flame goes out, but the rocket keeps going up. My backdrop to the question, have we seen the peak of the NFL?
Not necessarily.
I think it's flying parallel to the ground. I think there's a pipeline problem for players, but I think what they're doing in Europe shows that they realize they have to grow the pie, and it may not be in North America.
All right, this side, you're up.
Hi there, my name is Brady, and my question is, what's your take on Andrew Luck's early retirement, and do you see this as a common trend or even a norm in the coming years of the NFL?
Yeah, I think you'll see more and more of it, especially with players that have hit it big with at least one contract. So could Andrew Luck have made many, many more millions? Yes, but he probably made about $100 million just during the time that he played. And so if you're relatively in one piece, so far as we know, and often the truth of this comes out in later years, but so far as we know he has his wits about him, even though his body has been battered. Let's get out before further body battering and before he, in his case, a very smart guy, has to pay some sort of price neurologically. And I think you'll see more and more of that, not necessarily among guys who are still trying to scrape by, but among those who've gotten theirs. They'll get out while they're getting as good.
Yeah, you've seen lower profile players do it as well, but
Yes.
luck, of course, is the headline. All right, potent potables for 400, Alex.
Mr. Lee, I have the same question that was just asked to Mr. Costas a few minutes ago. What is your favorite moment that you've ever covered or experienced?
I was asked that earlier today, a little session over at WSOU. I would say the 2010 World Cup, which I think changed the template for soccer in this country, which for me was just a fascinating experience. We've got to remember South Africa was only 20 years removed from apartheid and only 16 years into democracy. It was an enterprise that our network put so many people and so much money behind. And I find myself in a room in Cape Town in the middle of the World Cup, about to interview Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who says, "Can we first pause for a brief non-denominational prayer?" And you don't say no to a Nobel Prize winner, a Peace Prize winner. That event, you can't top that, because all 300 of us who worked on that were blood brothers, and we run into each other. We pick up right where we left off, both here and in South Africa.
Right. For Mr. Costas, I have a family friend who went to Providence College and wanted me to ask you if you remember Marvin
Barnes.
Barnes and a time machine story.
I certainly do. Marvin has since left us. He was a great player at Providence. He was the second player taken in both the NBA and ABA draft behind Bill Walton the year he came out. He was the ABA's Rookie of the Year in 1974-75, in a year that included Moses Malone's first year in the ABA. I'm quite certain that he would have been an easy Hall of Famer had he not derailed his career and life with many trips down wrong paths. But he was also an extremely funny and likable guy. So here are the Spirits of St. Louis, a team that embodied the wild and wacky nature of the ABA. And we're playing the Kentucky Colonels in Louisville. Louisville's about a 4.5-hour drive from St. Louis, but it happens to be in the Eastern time zone. So the day after the game, this is before teams traveled routinely on charters, the morning after the game, the trainer, who doubled as the traveling secretary, hands out the itinerary for the commercial flight. And it says TWA Flight 305, depart Louisville 8 a.m., arrive St. Louis 7:56. And Marvin Barnes calls me over, brandishes the itinerary, drapes an arm over my shoulder, and from more than a foot above me, he addresses me and says, bro, do you see this? I said, yes, I do. He says, well, I don't know about you, but as for me, I am not getting on any time machine.
All right, top that question. You're up, sir.
Hi, my name's Mickey Grennan. I'm a sophomore student currently. Mr. Costas, you talked a lot about the Olympics opening ceremonies. What kind of research do you like to conduct, and what level of familiarity do you like to have with all the countries before calling that?
You know, if there's one thing that I wish I could go back and have a do-over on, the opening ceremonies are just a riddle. You know, some people want it to be like a church service. To them, it's the absolute epitome of everything that is sanctified about sports. And to other people, come on, a little levity. And it does have an element. It's like half United Nations Security Council meeting and half Cirque du Soleil. You know, and I always thought, well, you know, why it should be presided over by who was then the head of the United Nations?
Boutros Ghali.
Boutros Ghali,
Yeah,
my favorite.
yes.
All right, it should have been presided over by Boutros Ghali and Mary Hart from Entertainment Tonight, because it was both those things. And so I would try to give it the solemnity that it deserved at times, but then at other times I would try to say something reasonably lighthearted. And most people appreciated that, but others thought that I had somehow, engaged in some sort of sacrilege. And with the Summer Olympics, you got more than 200 countries. And so all you have time for, in many cases, maybe not the ones with the largest delegations, but the smaller delegations, is just like play tidbit ping pong with Dick Enberg or Katie Couric or whoever I was hosting it with. All right, you take Latvia and I'll take Lithuania. You know, and you'd come up with some little note. Did you know that Bolivia was where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid met their untimely end? That was my Bolivia note more than once.
Yeah, the fall will probably kill you.
Yeah.
All right, two more, both on this side of the room.
All right. Thank you to both Bobs for coming in tonight. I really appreciate it.
He has to.
Yeah. Well, thank you anyway. But for Bob Lee, it was, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, the night after a Monday Night Football broadcast, you came on the air and stood with Sergio Dip after he received a lot of trolling on social media. As both, respected leaders at the networks you've worked at, when do you feel it's appropriate not only to, talk about the intersection of societal issues in sports, but also stand with a colleague when you feel like they're being attacked?
I want to remind those that may not be familiar, it was a Monday Night Football game. Sergio Dip, working for ESPN in Mexico, bilingually, was working sidelines, threw to him, and did not have the best broad, and it happens to all of us. Now here's somebody not working in his native tongue. And the point I made the next day was, I've done so much international soccer, I would sit down at a World Cup, find myself working with Jurgen Klinsmann, who speaks colloquial English, but it's not his first language, Roberto Martinez, who's from Catalan, Michael Ballack, who's just a ball of fun to spend a summer with, but he's German. And my respect for those men is just inestimable because they're working in their native language. I can recall being down in Costa Rica for a qualifier once, and I thought I knew enough Spanglish around football to try and do an interview, and I gave it up after 20 seconds. I'm sorry, we're going to have to do a layover. I'll do it in English. And so to stand up, I thought it was just the right thing to do. Sergio needed someone just to say, this is not easy. Try doing it. And, there are those moments. That was an easy call. I appreciate the fact you remember it, but that was an easy call.
Very often, whether it's a situation like that or it's just an issue you think you're going to address or you'd like to address, especially on network television, contrary to what some people think, it's not 100% your call. It's not like Peter Finch or now Bryan Cranston on Broadway in Network, where the Howard Beale character just throws open the window. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Even if you are mad as hell, it doesn't play out that way. So it's like, I need a minute here, or I need 2 minutes here. And somebody's going to decide, besides you, whether to give it to you. Now, in a play-by-play situation, you can work some certain things in parenthetically, but as I said earlier, those generally should not be about weighty issues. They should be about the game, maybe just an aside about an issue. But if you're going to get into something in any depth at all, they've got to make the space for you. And that's not something that you can just do unilaterally. And there have been times when I've been granted that space and times when I've found it very frustrating that for whatever reason, either because they thought there was something else that was more appealing to the audience or because they got cold feet, they denied me that space.
All right, last one.
Mr. Costas, earlier you had mentioned Colin Kaepernick, and I was listening to a podcast the other day with, younger sports media figures, Arian Foster and Nick Wright, and Nick Wright made a comment that he begged the question that if Kaepernick was kneeling and he wasn't arguing for social justice, but rather better veterans benefits, do you think that the backlash would still be the same? And I have the question, do you think the coverage and the backlash around the Kaepernick situation was around what he was arguing for or patriotism in itself?
Well, it's complicated. First of all, the issue that he is calling attention to is a legitimate and important issue. And I give him credit for having raised money, giving money of his own and raised money, so he's walked the walk. I think it doesn't diminish your respect for that when you say that he's not necessarily the heir to Muhammad Ali or Arthur Ashe, because here's a guy who said, I don't vote because the oppressor will never allow you to vote your way out of your oppression. Well, I guess it doesn't matter to him that when he first knelt, Barack Obama was president, and now Donald Trump, who vilifies him and others like him, is the president of the United States. And if you're going to wear socks that depict cops, not rogue cops, but all cops, as pigs, you're going to diminish the credibility of your own message. But to your point, I hadn't heard it put that way. I think it's an interesting question. if his stated purpose was greater benefits for veterans, and the anthem is so often associated with the military and the military alone, especially at football games, I think that would have received from much of the football public a much more understanding and even hospitable reception. But a lot of people can't separate it. There are some people who respect the issue and who honestly say, choose any other venue. But the anthem represents not just the nation's flaws and shortcomings, because until some country becomes utopia, every nation will have flaws and shortcomings. It also represents the nation's ideals and aspirations. When you see like a 98-year-old veteran played the national anthem on a harmonica the other night at Madison Square Garden, I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum, that gives you goosebumps. And you realize that to a lot of decent Americans who don't want Colin Kaepernick and people who superficially look like him to be oppressed in any way, to a lot of them, that song means something else. And so Colin Kaepernick cannot expect that what he intends will be universally what people get from it. On the other hand, I think that the negative response has been so over the top and so irrational. Think of it this way. If any team had signed Colin Kaepernick, and I don't know about now, but in 2017, 2018, it's ridiculous to think that Colin Kaepernick was one of the 100 most capable quarterbacks in America. You got 32 teams, 64 quarterbacks, training camp, injuries, guys moving in and out. And when you think of some of the guys who have been signed, who at their best were awful, all right, it was clearly blackballed. But think of some of the people the Bengals have drafted. Think of Tyreek Hill and who's the Kareem Hunt. Right. All right, when those guys guilty of domestic violence and others with long rap sheets. Pac-Man Jones played on multiple teams. He was a multiple offender, not just of NFL rules. He's a criminal. All right, were there protests outside the stadium of each of his new teams? There's a weird disconnect here. We have more of, meaning that portion of the public, more of a negative response to Colin Kaepernick than we do to criminals, especially if those criminals can get into the end zone for our team. That's good.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your question. And let's thank our special guests, Bob Costas and Bob Lee, for a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Really.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. This concludes our event.